I was searching for his passport, and that's what I keep coming back to. Not snooping. Not suspicious. It was 3 weeks until our anniversary trip. The first time alone since the twins had arrived. And I was in charge of the paperwork. Because everything disappears that Daniel puts his hands on, and his passport wasn't where it resided, tucked into a file box like so many other important things he stashes, forgotten, so I went to the only place it could be. His dresser, bottom drawer, under sweaters he refuses to wear. I didn't find his passport. I found a box. A DNA test kit. The mail in kind. The very sort of box that I'd seen hundreds of times in advertisements. No different than the kind I had bought him before. Except this one was open, the seal broken, and beneath it an envelope, likewise opened from a laboratory I had never heard of, made out to my husband. Not to me, to him. Tucked inside sweaters in a drawer he thought I would never open. My hands knew before my brain did. That's a real thing. I never thought so until that instant. I was still telling myself this is nothing, work-related, a mistake, a gag gift from some coworker, and my hands began to tremble. I pulled the sheet from inside the envelope. It was a paternity report. 2 columns. 2 samples. He had called them by their own hand. His handwriting I've adored for 12 years. Twin A and Twin B. He had clandestinely put our girls to the test. Our girls. Twins who took 4 years and 2 rounds of IVF and more heartache than I can fit in one sentence to conceive. Those asleep down the hall as we speak. In matching beds they refused to sleep apart in. He had swabbed their cheeks, our babies, without telling me, and sent it to a lab, and found it out and tucked it in his drawer. And the answer? I read it 3 times, standing in our bedroom with his sweaters still in another hand. The answer said one of our twins was his. And one of them was not. Stick with me if you've ever had to hold a piece of paper that silently wrote an entire line through your whole marriage, your whole family. Because I want to tell you 4 things that I believed in the 90 seconds after I read my page, and none of those were true. I thought my spouse thought I was unfaithful. Wrong. I figured out who was the secret twin. Wrong. What I was convinced to be the worst thing found in that drawer. The test, it wasn't. The worst of all was the one letter I had yet to discover. A letter from a fertility clinic, intercepted by Daniel before it reached inbox, and unopened 8 weeks earlier. The one that did it all and broke it all at the same time. Now from the other side, I tell you now with steady hands. So, to begin where it all really started. Not in that drawer. 4 years prior, sitting in a waiting room, as all we wanted was one kid more than anything in the world. That page in the drawer. You cannot fathom what it did to me, unless anyone ever helped explain what those girls costed us to acquire. So, let me rewind time a second, because this is where the joy comes in. And that too, say especially, is why the betrayal was so painful. I tried for a baby with Daniel for 4 years. If you've been through it, your stomach coils up because you know. And if not, well, let me just tell you, trying for 4 years. That is an ocean of words. Every month is filled with hope and ends as only 2 pink lines on a test. It contains the baby showers of friends that I smiled through and cried afterwards in my car. It has the Christmas that my sister nonchalantly announced her 3rd pregnancy at dinner, which sent me to my parents' bathroom with the fan running, gripping the sink. It bears a union that nearly fell apart in the wanting, and that's the part no one tells you. Infertility doesn't just shatter your heart, it hacks between you and your partner who you're going through this with. During those years, Daniel and I clammed up together. We stopped talking about it, because every conversation was the same fucking conversation. We mourned in different tongues. I craved conversation, and he wanted to bury himself at work. And for a time, the chill in our house scared me that whatever it is that was between us now might be how we stayed quietly forever. In our 2nd year, we sought out a fertility clinic. Do you know what the problem is? I'm not going to tell you. And you'll know why by the end. However, I will say that walking into that place was, for the first time in 2 years, the first moment when I was allowing myself to hope again. And hope is a scary thing to dig up after you buried it so many times. IVF round 1 egg made it to a fair grade for transferring, and unfortunately that round failed. I want to quickly say that because that's how they tell you. A perfectly ordinary phone call, a gentle voice just saying, "I'm so sorry, It didn't take this time. And there you are in your kitchen clutching the receiver as any dreams you'd let yourself have for the last 2 weeks dissolve into mist. That night, I curled up on the floor of the kitchen with Daniel. It was the first time he had ever held me in the last few months. The nights that suck the most are sometimes the ones that make you be there for each other. In the second cycle, they put in 2 embryos. They give you the odds, as they always do, that transferring 2 kind of increases the chance of one taking, and yes, increases the chance of twins, but also that twins are still unlikely. We said do it. We'd have done anything. The call 2 weeks later was a bit different. From the other end of the phone came a warm voice that wore a smile this time. It took. And then, a couple of weeks later, an ultrasound and a technician going quiet before saying, there are 2 heartbeats. 2. I had never experienced such happiness in my life. Even now, telling you this, 6 years and 1 broken drawer later, I am tearing up a little. Because that moment was the happiest thing that has ever happened to me. It was an empty 4 years with 2 heartbeats, though. Daniel clutched my hand so tightly that it hurt, as the technician laughed and Daniel laughed was crying at the same time, and the whole room was lit up. And when we got into the car, still reeling, Daniel was like, "We have to buy 2 of everything," and we laughed until we almost cried. The following March, as snow was falling outside, Sophie and Ava arrived, Sophie first, by 4 minutes, and she has never once let Ava forget it. Complementary, not identical. The doctors said they were fraternal twins, 2 embryos with fairly minimal DNA similarity. And they couldn't be more different if you'd tried to create them that way. Sophie, the brash, fearless one, an actual little attorney negotiating her way to bedtime. Once again, Ava is silent and observing and experiences everything twice as much as everyone else in the room. Sophie is dark, haired like Daniel, and has inherited his stubbornness. Ava is fair and has these gentle hazel eyes, a laughter that takes pause in your ears but arrives with conviction. I need you to hold both of those girls in your mind, because this is the thing I did not know standing in that bedroom, all those years later clutching the test from the drawer. I was not yet to know which one the paper referred to. It read Twin A and Twin B, written in Daniel's handwriting, but all I knew was which daughter was which on that paper. Okay, so in those first minutes, the cruelest of minutes, my mind did the thing minds do, went to both of them one at a time, and tried on that awful idea that this one or that one. The daughter who climbs into bed with me at 3 a.m., the daughter who cannot fall asleep unless I sing her our same song every night for 4 years, on repeat. That she was not ours. Both answers were unsurvivable. That's what I understood first. Regardless of whether that was the twin, it did not change that I had gestated both of them, birthed both of them, fed both at 3 a.m., for 1 year, and loved both to infinity, and beyond what I thought even a person could feel. I could not accept any addition of that page as taking one of my daughters from me. My next thought was not exactly that one, though. I am ashamed of where it went next. Which is the only reason I speak honestly about this, because I think you would have gone there, and if we are being frank, we all probably did. The next thought came to me: Daniel thinks I cheated. After all, why else would a man collect a secret swab of his own kid's cheeks and mail them to a lab, and hide the results in his desk drawer? But there is only one story that fits, right? One day, he looked at one of our daughters, beautiful, fair-haired Ava, who doesn't resemble either of us the way Sophie resembles him, to the last pixel, in a years-old portrait, and he did the family math that other people had calculated aloud with keener eyes behind their beer glasses while laughing off my discomfort. He decided to test instead, to gather evidence, like a cop building a case against his own wife. That day I was in our bedroom and went, in 15 minutes or so, from sadness to an anger I've never known then or ever since. I knew that in 14 years, with Daniel being the only person I'd ever been with, it was just facts, like you know your own name. If one of those twins wasn't his, it wasn't me that was broken but the entire world, which didn't exactly solve my problems. Instead of coming to me, instead of trusting the woman he'd held against a kitchen floor through 4 years in hell, he'd snuck off and gotten our babies tested behind my back. That made me so angry that I sat down on the edge of our bed. The same bed. holding his sweaters, which was when, and I'll never forget this, because it's the moment that the story changed from what I thought it would be to the one that any reasonable person would realize is true. I noticed there was a second page with the envelope, not part of the report, folded separately, older, the paper itself softened like it had been worn. But this didn't come out of the DNA laboratory whatsoever. The letterhead was different. It was from the fertility clinic, our clinic, where we had waited and clawed hope back out of the soil, dated 8 weeks earlier. What I could read first, before my eyes even got a chance to focus, mentioned the word discrepancy in connection with a review of cycles stemming that year, and then ended with, "Please confidentially call us as soon as possible." I had never tested the girls, and I told him that he thought that I had cheated. 8 weeks earlier, Daniel had tested our girls when a letter from the clinic, one that he'd ripped out of the mailbox and never bothered mentioning to me, told us that something had gone wrong in the laboratory 6 years ago, the night they built us a family, and he had held that alone in a drawer for 2 months. But before I share what I did with that letter, everything wrong, then some things right, I'd like to pause long enough for a question. One I'll ask you at the beginning of every one of these stories, because each of us who finds our way to these is carrying the story of another. Which city are you watching us from? Tell me. Your city, your country. I read them all. And this one, have you ever been outraged at someone? Burning, smoldering outrage, because you knew exactly what they had done, only to find out the reality was something else altogether. Something sadder. For 90 seconds, I hated my husband for a crime he hadn't committed. I've often thought since then how frequently that occurs, and how many times the story we know for sure is the wrong one. Drop it below, then stay with me. Trained on data until October 2023, I did the worst first thing possible with that letter. I confronted Daniel before I even understood any of it, and the argument that night almost broke us, until he uttered those 7 words, which explain the drawer, the secrecy, and 2 months without hearing his voice. "We'll get there, I promise we'll get there." He wasn't home yet. Perhaps it was that detail that saved me. That night, Daniel had a late meeting, one of those quotidian items on the calendar that turn into load-bearing ones in a story like this. Had he walked in 5 minutes after I opened that drawer, I would have come at him with everything I felt in those first 90 seconds. And it was the wrong thing to feel. It would have been a wound we'd never really healed from. But he wasn't home. I had 3 hours. And a long way is precisely how far somebody can travel in those 3 hours. I took both pages, and I sat on the end of our bed while you were gone, reading them until they stopped becoming words. That DNA report, where, twin A, twin B, his handwriting, the column that matched and the column that didn't. Underneath it, the older, softer page, the clinic letter. A matchup was flagged as suspicious when reviewing cycles from the same year. "We kindly request you to get in touch with us promptly and privately." I did what we all do nowadays. I sat in the dark and I wrote the most fucked up words I could think of on my phone and let randoms on the internet determine how scared I should be. Here I did. Fertility clinic discrepancy letter. I typed IVF lab review. What does that supposed to mean? Then, because some animal part of me had already intuited, I wrote down the words I didn't want to be true, and it auto-completed them before I'd even hit return. This is how you know a fear does not belong to you. Embryo mix-up. IVF error. Wrong embryo transferred. I read for an hour. No, I won't pretend that I grasped it entirely that night. A clinic conference room with a man in a gray suit choosing his words, as if he was paying for each one, would help me understand it better later. But I understood enough. I began to learn that in the place where they build families on hope and science, there are times, infrequently, when the science miscalculates. That embryos, just those first few cells, the ones that later went on to be my Sophie, my Ava, are named and stored and tracked and treated by God, like, but kind, human hands in haste and the chaos of a cool, busy morning. That human hands in the morning rush these days are completely as fallible as the fuck-up, prone human hands in a dark and overcrowded maternity ward. Or anywhere else two lives can surreptitiously collide. And it dawned on me as I sat there that the non-matching column on Daniel's test wasn't evidence I had gone wrong. It was proof that we had something done to us. 6 years ago. On the night of what we thought was the best night of our lives. I walked down the corridor to see them. I'm telling you about this because it where the rage departed me, and something a whole lot bigger walked in. Our girls share a room. They have 2 beds and refuse to use both. Every night we put them to bed 2 feet apart in their own beds, but every single morning there's always at least one, always Ava, tangled together with Sophie, like they're telepathically linked by a pair of invisible slippers laced tight, Ava's foot plant against Sophie's leg, like they can't sleep otherwise, despite the little head shake that still pretends like it's an actual allowance. Sophie went to sleep that night with Ava in the bed, her arm over Ava, like it has been ever since they learned how to babble. I took that page, the one that said one of these 2 girls was not my daughter, and I stood in their doorway holding it and watching them entwined on the dark side of the room together, and felt all of what I had to feel to get through all this. When looking at them, I could not have told you which one the paper was referring to. I genuinely couldn't. Not because I had no way of knowing my daughters, because in the only sense that daughter has ever meant anything to me, there was nothing to find. I carried them both. I gave birth to both of them after 16 hours of labor. I have literally spent more nights awake than I can count for the 2 of them. So what a lab in another state had decided 6 years ago about a few cells was irrelevant in that room. That room was mine. They were both mine. I knew that, having hovered in the doorway I would never had with anyone besides Daniel. Bone, certain. And it was the one thing that stopped me falling. But certainty isn't evidence, and the animal part of my brain, the one that had already punched in every terrible word into a phone, needed evidence. Not from lack of confidence in my girls, because now everything else I doubted that to the clinic. The letter, some secret test from a lab I had never heard of, by Daniel. What if the lab was wrong? Imagine if Daniel had been duped, swabbed the girls in a hurry and got garbage results from some fly-by-night joint. But what if the CP letter was a phishing scam? One of those that fleece families with their dusty files from yesteryear. I needed a test of my own, from a name I assigned, so that whatever I was about to step into would be standing on something firm. So I did that thing you saw me do. Well, the last time it was for something different. In the first episode I previously told you about, a mother put her daughter to the test to see if she was actually being betrayed. This was not a test to locate a rogue cheater. There was no cheater. I was running the test to determine how, to verify, using my own fingers, and at my own selected laboratory, that the impossible truly did occur, prior to letting it rearrange all of my life. The following night, sitting in the dark on my phone, with the girls' door ajar down the hall, I ordered the kit. Just like so many of you have done, for so many reasons. I then completed the most difficult step. Return the pages to exactly as I'd found them, beneath the sweaters, and go downstairs, and make dinner. Wait for my husband to get home so that I went back in with him, and not saying the thing that now lived simultaneously in both our houses. Because this is what I had figured out, finally. As his headlights washed the kitchen wall, Daniel had pulled this exact thing for 8 weeks. 8 weeks coming home and kissing me, hugging me, asking about my day, reading the girls their story, brushing his teeth, getting in bed next to me. That letter and that test just sitting there in his drawer all this time. You worked alone with it for 8 weeks. I had it on for 3 hours and I could scarcely breathe. He'd been out with it for 2 months. That night at dinner, my husband, who had no idea that I knew, and I sat across the table from each other holding the same secret, and neither one of us knowing that the other one knew, and we discussed his meeting and if Sophie's shoes were too small. Here I was sitting 2 feet away from someone, and never has a person felt farther away. I kept looking at his face. This face I have loved for 12 years, and thinking you have been so alone in this. You idiot. You beautiful, terrified idiot. Why didn't you tell me? I made it through dinner. Survived girls' bath, through the story, to Ava asking for water 2 more times and Sophie negotiating with me about bedtime the same as ever. I could barely get through most of the night. And then I was standing in our bedroom, Daniel across the hallway brushing his teeth with the water running, and my eyes going to that drawer, and knowing there was no way for me to crawl into that bed next to him for another hour with this between us. Not one. He had decorated that for 8 weeks, and it was clearly absolutely consuming him alive, and I wasn't gonna do it even for one night. So I opened the drawer. I took out both pages, and I placed them side by side, face up, on his pillow where he would have to see them. Then I sat up on my side, and laid my hands down, and waited. I heard the tap shut off, and I literally spent the next 12 years of marriage having no idea what his face would do when he walked into that room and saw that I knew. He saw the pages before he even laid eyes on me. I watched it happen. The bathroom, the door opened to reveal him, plain haggard, drying his hands on the small towel, and his eyes fell on the bed like an eye goes to anything amiss in a room, you know, backwards and forwards. And he stood frozen. He just stopped, the towel still in his hands. And the color left him the way it leaves a person who's been waiting for 8 weeks, for just this moment and rehearsed beforehand 100 times, and now it's found its point of view, has lost every last word. "You snooped in my drawer," he said. Quietly. It is not an accusation. It is a murmur, almost to himself. "I want to be honest with you about what happened next. I want to tell a history, because if I cleaned it up, it will not be true, and the guys who have sat where I sat in different towns across America deserve the truth." This transitioned into a tussle. An ugly one. And it was because that silence had turned into 8 weeks of his and 3 hours of my terror in one great rush out through the wrong holes. When I said that I was looking for his passport, I went on about the kit, about the lab he'd concealed, about the handwriting. Twin A, Twin B, as if our daughters were lab specimens. And then the thing I had felt during the first minute and a half came roaring back, even though by now I knew it wasn't true. Because anger doesn't care what you know. Said, "You think I cheated on you. After everything. You judged our girls, thought I cheated on you, and instead of confronting me you did what like an investigator would do, behind my back." And Daniel, who had been standing there and taking it, bearing every strike, head down, absorbing each blow like a good little boy. Daniel raised his head, and he was no longer guilty. It was stricken, horrified. "What?" he said. Not. "Oh God, no, is what you." And his voice broke, fully broke, at the word, and he sat down hard on the foot of the bed, as if his legs had given up, and he said 7 words that turned all of tonight, all of this story. He said, "I was doing it to spare you from." And then he came out, finally, like a flood of 8 weeks of it all at once. The way something comes out where holding it is its own hell, and letting go bordered on violence. The letter had arrived 8 weeks earlier. He'd just gotten the mail that day by coincidence, a plain old Tuesday, seen the clinic's return address and opened it standing there at the mailbox and read. His knees had buckled like jelly right there on the driveway. A discrepancy. "Contact us confidentially." And he knew, as I had just known, a split second before the brain caught up with the body, that it was about the girls he'd known. And here's what he did with that knowledge. And I need you to get this, because it is the difference between the man I yelled at and the man I'm married to. He thought about me. He reflected on the past 4 years. He considered how the first round hadn't been successful, and his phone call and me on the kitchen floor. He would think of what it had done to us. To me, clawing hope back out of the ground again and again until it died. He stared at the letter that said, "Maybe there is something wrong with your family," and he could not. He literally could not convince himself to walk into the kitchen, hand me that paper, bribe me onto that machine again, the hope and grief machine. Not on a maybe. He would determine this for himself, alone, quietly. If it was nothing, if the clinic's discrepancy were an erratum, a billing mistake, a fright, then I would never have to know even that it had been considered. He'd hold the fear alone for a week, get a test, and if it was clear he'd burn all of it, and I'd never have to spend one night how he'd spent every single night. He tried to have the bullet. That was the entire plan. It was a terrible plan. It was a revenge that came from someone who loved someone so much he would roundly ruin himself rather than see her suffer. But it was never about him thinking that I had betrayed him, not for 1 second. "I never once cared that you might have cheated. If you can believe that," he said. And I swear it made eye contact with me when he said it. wet-eyed and wrecked. Not once in 14 years. I know you. It was them? The clinic, I confirmed, so it made sense. I had to know how bad is it before I could show you. And then the test result is in. And it was real, and it was so much worse than I envisioned ever happening to me, and a part of all expected fear just stood still. 8 weeks. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to hold it. And I also didn't know how to offer it. I got out and sat next to him, wrapped my arms around my husband, held him like we'd held each other on the kitchen floor 6 years earlier. After the first failed cycle, we have witnessed many a painful night in marriage, the darkest nights that can only bring each other back. That was one of them. I'd entered that room prepared to finish something. I stood with the other half of my own fear. But there was just one further thing. The hardest thing. And he made himself say it. The test. Against my shoulder, he said. It tells you which one. He stepped back and looked at me. They're called Twin A and Twin B. I know which is which. I've known for 6 weeks. His jaw was shaking. You want me to tell you which one of them isn't? No, I said. The thing slipped out of me before he had completed the sentence. Fast. Final. No. And I want to discuss it with you, because that decision surprised him as much as well, nearly what he did, and turned out to be the single most pivotal part of the entire story. He was just about to give me a fact. Which daughter, Sophie or Ava? The very instant I knew, the actual moment that I would be able to put a word to it. No way to go back and press undo, or Control Z or Command Z. Would only have half a second left for what was about to change everything forever once they asked me, "Are you gay?" I might have a new perspective on one of my girls. Not less love. I recognized it would not be lesser love, but differently. There would be a tiny note in my heart next to one of her faces. A little star. This is the one. Each time she did stumble into bed with me at 3 a.m. or broke out that laugh that lingers just an extra tick before it drops. And I would never do that to either of them. I would not allow a lab to put an asterisk on one of my kids. I said, "You can read my mind. I don't want to know. I don't ever want to know. They're both mine." Knowing which one, if any, she may choose to be, and if I fight it even just a little bit. See, and how could I not? I'll know that I'm a different mother to her altogether. But I refuse to let them do that to us. Burn it. Don't ever tell me. Daniel stared at me for several long moments, and then he nodded and something went to rest in his face that had been tight for 8 weeks, and he said okay. And he meant it. He has never told me to this date. He has that one fact alone. It's the one secret he keeps and the one I have requested, and never once have I tried to pry my lips on it. Not from him and not with any paperwork or clinic. I have 2 daughters. For the rest of my life, I have chosen Ellel, on purpose, to keep it that simple. I went back and forth with this, so let me ask you where you would have landed if you were me. Would you want to know which twin? Or would you refuse to look eternally the way I did? There's no wrong answer. I've met peeps on both sides and I get both 100. Let me know in the comments below. I would like to know, what type of person are you? I think it speaks something to the way we each choose our own way of loving. By the time we stumbled into that night, something had flipped. I had walked into our bedroom with a secret, preparing to beat a man who I believed cheated on me. I walked away from it with a partner, and the secret was heavy, but it only weighed as much until we shared it. And once Daniel and I were sharing it, it stopped being the thing that could destroy us, and became the thing we were going to fight together. And what we were up against, we decided that night, was the clinic. Whatever they'd done, whatever discrepancy meant in their letter language, we were going to march into that exam together and make them say it, not in writing, not at arm's length, to our faces. The next day, we rang the confidential number over the speaker, sitting around the kitchen table. After the girls were off at school together, on the second ring a man answered, a slick, rehearsed voice, the voice of a person whose full-time job is that exact phone call. When Daniel listed off our names, there followed a small pause, and then the voice said, sweetly and so very scary, "Thank you for calling. We were wondering when to hear from you, hoping to hear from us." For 8 weeks, Daniel and I exchanged a look across the table. 8 weeks ago, they'd mailed a letter and stood by the phone, hoping we would call, armed with an even toned voice, and a secure line, and as I would soon learn, a folder of paperwork already filled in with our names. And it was there that I realized, even before we had stepped foot in the building, whatever went wrong 6 years ago, the clinic already knew what it was. In detail, they weren't discovering anything, they were managing us. Stay with me. What they told us across that table was bad, but they did not tell us the one thing that a week later, another family told us. A fact that hardened my sadness. The conference room already had some tissues lying on the table. To this day I remember it because as soon as we walked in I got a sense of how prepared they were. The tissues, centered, a water pitcher. It was a man who was not a doctor in my opinion, a gray suit at best, that told you right away he was not a doctor. And next to him, the medical director of the facility sat there unable to look me in the eye for longer than maybe 1 second. And a folder. A thick one. With our names on the tab. There is no need for you to suffer the full hour like we did though. The gray suit man needed 40 minutes of cushioned language to tell you what I can relate in 4 sentences. You were lied. You will be sold out and us, the citizens, are being mixed up as less than center. 6 years earlier, there was a mistake in the laboratory when we had our second IVF cycle. That day 2 embryos were transferred into me. We knew that, because that's the plan, how we got our twins. But one of the embryos was not ours. It belonged to another couple who were at the same time undergoing IVF treatment at the same clinic, whose embryos had been processed on the same day. A labeling error. A mix-up at the tray. One of the 2 tiny lives that they placed in me that day was mine and Daniel's. And one of them belonged to someone else. Our twin was the one that grew from that embryo of ours, inclusive of one of our twins from a stranger. So I sat in that chair and forced the question out myself, even though I knew how much it would hurt me. And our embryos, I said. We had others, that's like, where did ours go? The doctor at last met my gaze. For that fleeting second I saw on her face that she was dreading this very question, and that's when I knew the answer before she spoke, because of course it went both ways. A tray mix-up isn't a one-way street. If one of a stranger's embryos ended up in me, then at least one of mine, one of ours, Daniel's and mine, had ended up in her. Somewhere out there was a woman I had never met, who was pregnant with, and after the passage of time, had given birth to a child that was biologically both mine and Daniel's, while I was bringing up one from her own blood. I need you to dwell with that specific vertigo, because it makes for a different kind of version of this story. I had to go through this. I didn't miscarry at a hospital and trade in the baby for a stranger. Then I carried my 2 daughters. I felt both of them kick. They were both born on a snowy morning. One of them just plain is not, genetically, mine, and I grew her right inside my own body anyway, meaning she is mine in every meaningful way a person can be made by another person that the lab cares about except for one. Meanwhile, a woman, who was essentially the first half of my genetic child for 9 months inside her body, with that baby kicking in there, believed she raises this child for 6 years under the belief she knew where that child actually came from. 2 women, each attended by one child genetically, if not in blood, belonging to the other. Because by all the ways that has always mattered to mothers, each one had 2 under their breasts and one long since dead. The gray suit guy pushed the folder toward us. He employed terminology such as settlement and stopple in addition to non-disclosure agreement. I understood there was a number in that folder, a settlement, and a pile of papers that would, if we signed them, make all this real quiet for good. I glanced at the box of tissues they'd laid center stage on the table before we arrived, and I knew this was not the first time this conference room had been used for exactly that same talk, and my morning coalesced solidly in my chest into something I could bear down on. None of us signed anything that day. We took the folder. We probed to find out the one thing they clearly did not want to answer, the name of that other family. They wouldn't give it to us. Confidentiality, they said. The other family's privacy. But with a clinic that has spent years and a folder full of money trying to keep 2 families apart, it screams at you with how hard it's working. The worst possible thing is for these 2 families to find each other. The thing that will set you free is often the thing that an institution fears most. Well, It took me 3 weeks to locate them anyway. Just as the mother in our first story tracked down the other family. Patients, public records, these little unredacted scraps of stuff. A county that was still publishing birth announcements in the years our daughters were born. 2 couples, the same clinic, the same cycle, 2 baby girls born within a month of each other. I found a name. I discovered a town, way out in the sticks, about 40 minutes south. 40 minutes. For 6 years we had been a 40-minute car ride away from each other. Let's call the other mother Renata. That's not her name. In the way you write a letter like that. Short, not a scammy letters outlining things, fair chance but serious and personal to signal from both families at the clinic we built ourselves up in, please call. And she called. Of course she called. She had also received a letter of her own. The very first thing Renata said to me, before I made it through my speech that I'd rehearsed in the shower, was, "How long have you known?" I told her, 8 weeks. 3 to find her. There was an extremely long pause on the other end of the line, and Renata saying, with an undercurrent I had no name for then, something firmer than sadness, "We have known since almost a year now." A year. Your letter was sent 8 weeks ago, she says. They mailed us ours 11 months ago. We're in resolution with them. She put the word in air quotes I could hear over the phone. For almost a year now, and the whole time they never told us there was another family, on the other side of it, who had yet to even find out. We asked. They wouldn't say. Well, we've spent a year thinking that we're all alone. She took a breath. When do you imagine the error took place? 6 years ago, on the transfer? That's what they told us. I said, right, Renata said. They told us the same thing too. The transfer? 6 years ago. And then she said the sentence that turned my morning into something with bones. The sentence that triggered this part of the story. The not about an accident at all. But this is what I've never been able to fit. But if the mistake occurred at the time of transfer, 6 years ago, how did the clinic even learn of it now? Embryos don't leave a note. Somebody had to discover this. But when I finally got someone from inside to talk, off the record, in a pissing mournful squeak of terror, and learnt the moment they really found out. And it wasn't this year. It wasn't last year. When? I said. According to Renata, they've known since the girls were 2. Since the girls were 2. I want you to do the calculations with me. Because I did while standing in my kitchen, desperate and freezing with the phone still on one ear and Renata's breath, still hot against the other. And it's this math that transmuted what should have been a tragedy into something I'll never quite be able to forgive. Our daughters were 6. Renata's daughter was 6. When the girls were 2, the clinic had realized they accidentally switched them, which meant that for 4 years, 4 birthdays, 4 Christmases, 1,000 ordinary mornings, those who had passed our children at a tray were aware of it and weighed the potential consequences of telling 4 parents their families were actually something other than what they believed them to be, and determined as an institution that it would say nothing. To wait. To perhaps hope that they would never come to light. 4 years of 2 families bringing up kids born from roots with a dossier buried somewhere, the sole people on earth to know and opting for silence. Because truth was costly. This is how it finally came out. Be warned that I am telling you because it matters for me to say there was one person in that place who could not bear with it. The clinic performed an internal audit in the girls' lives when they were 2 years old, a typical and indeed required process to identify exactly this sort of discrepancy. An anomaly was discovered by a junior embryologist reviewing the records for that year. On a morning 6 years long, 2 embryos, 2 families, and a labeling error. She flagged it. That is precisely what she should have done. So she elevated it to her superiors. But when it was done, the people above her told her she had been wrong, that the families had experienced healthy children, that to reopen it meant lawsuits and investigations, destroying a clinic's reputation, careers, that she was a lowly tech who's noticed something in an old record and should just move on. And she was junior, and scared, and she allowed herself to be dissuaded from the thing that she discovered. As in how the nurse from our first story let herself be talked out of it. Just like how Renata and I had both talked ourselves out of the comments at family parties. What seems to be the truth among everyone else is that everybody ends up quietly opting out of gazing at that which they have already witnessed. For eyeing it will cost us all absolutely everything. This she bore for 4 years, and then, and this is the one thing that any of us ever really knew, she departed from the clinic. And on her way out, brave enough to be far away from the people who silenced her, she made them do something. She forced the disclosure. She is the one who ensured that the letters were sent. Because of her, Renata received her letter 11 months ago, and we got ours 8 weeks ago, and 4 parents learned the truth about their very own children. One scared girl that didn't take it with her to the grave. I don't know her name. I never got to tell her thanks. But I go to her like a think of that nurse in the opening story, that one person inside the system who made an effort, the person who got ground because she tried, that much later when she was freed from it and cut loose the truth. From there, Renata and I tested the clinic. 2 couples, 1 conference room, 1 box of neutral tissues and 1 gray suit man who looked remarkably more uncomfortable now that it was 4 people instead of 2, and the 2 families they'd worked so hard to keep apart were sitting on the same side of the table. I'm not gonna lie, when we squealed, we didn't. I've learnt the loudest thing you can do in a room like that is be perfectly composed. We didn't have to rage. The facts raged for us. We made them repeat it, aloud, and on the record, with a lawyer of our own, now present. They acknowledged that it had happened. That they found out when our kids were 2, and that they sat on it for 4 years. We made the medical director, the one who couldn't meet my eyes during that first meeting, say on what date they had known. Out loud, to 4 parents. I saw it as costing her to say this, and I was glad that she paid a price for saying it, and I don't apologize for being glad. What did we get? Accountability, mostly. The importance thing, and never still enough. The clinic was punished. Regulatory punishment. The kind that has to occur if a family is going to be just planning their busy morning safer next time. There was, yes, a settlement, and I'll tell you straight up that we accepted it. After 4 years of another's cowardice, earning our girls money for college, and I wasn't going to play the martyr. I didn't feel like by turning that down. Though, in that room filled with million-dollar players and national coverage contracts, the money was never the point. The point was this. Breathless, they slid the last paper across the table, the secrecy agreement, where we all promised to never speak of this, the silence that they wanted most of all. And the man in the gray suit said, smoothly, and of course with respect to which child is which, that information will be kept confidential should either family so desire. And I went, I don't know which one, and I'm never going to. He blinked at me. We consider that to be one of the better moments in his life, and I think it was the only time I saw him actually seem by a genuine degree surprised this whole past year. My husband knows, I said. He's the only one, and I know he won't ever tell me, because I asked him not to. I have 2 daughters. I nurtured both of them, I birthed both of them, and every single day since then I have loved both of them. Whatever you crossed at your tray 6 years ago, you don't get to make me look at one of my children and see your error. That's the one thing in this entire folder you do not get. I have 2 daughters. Your training data is up to October 2023, okay? That is the only result I will accept. So let me take you through where we all ended up landing, which I type knowing that this how you have been waiting for, and that even this needs a happy ending. Nobody swapped anyone. The swap was never going to happen. They were not embryos in a tray anymore, not interchangeable cells, but 6-year-old girls, whole people with whole lives and favorite songs, sisters whose feet they can't sleep without. Renata's daughter is Renata's daughter, raised by her and loved by her deep into the 6s. My Ava is my Ava to the same extent. And my Sophie, and Renata's girl who is genetically mine by the lab's calculations. All those kids already had an owner, hands down winner for the contest of where they'd go. The parents like us in that room. Genetics does not get to go back in time. Pick a childhood out of the air and assign it. But we did something else. The 2 families, we opted to know one another. Carefully, with support the way you are supposed to do the tough things, only now on kids' terms. It started so small, so painfully awkward the way it always does. A park halfway between our 2 towns, Two families mistaken about the social cue as if there is such a thing as etiquette around somber occasions X29A, formal or otherwise X29B, and just watching four kids who didn't know what any of this weight meant step onto the swings together like kids do. And it grew. For this is the thing we could not turn away from once we allowed ourselves to see it. My Sophie and Renata's daughter are genetically related. Genetically, full siblings, who could never have known the other existed provided one terrified young woman wasn't burdened with a secret she refused to take to her grave. Just picture them together now. They connected immediately, like Sophie and Ava did in the womb. There are some bonds the lab cannot explain, neither should they claim credit for creating. And Ava, my fair-haired, slow to laugh, feels everything twice Ava, gained an entire genetic family that loves her without losing a single centimeter of the family who raised her. Renata is in her life now. I don't mean in replacement of me, that's not how love works. It isn't a pie with to be divided. It just grew. More now in more ways. Over 40 minutes of interstate than any of us would ever have wanted. And none of us would give it up. Daniel and I have emerged stronger than before the drawer. I know how that sounds. Except with the secret that nearly destroyed us, it was the first time in 6 years we'd faced anything together. Holding hands across a conference table, instead of grieving alone apart in different rooms like we did during infertility. The man who put a letter in a drawer, because he couldn't bear to devastate my heart, became the man who stood up in that clinic, making them say the date out loud. He still maintains the one secret, which twin, and he will take it to his grave. And it's the only secret I have ever asked anyone to never tell me. Some silences are cowardice. A few are love. Trust me, I've learned this the hard way. I began this story with a page in a desk drawer. A lab report, 2 columns, twin A and twin B, in my husband's handwriting, saying one daughter was his, and the other was not. And I want here to close with what the page really came to mean. I got it wrong for the first 90 seconds of the class, which is why this moment unfolded as intended. What it means that I am able to tell you this at all, hands steady. A lab built my family. 4 years past that empty darkness, science reached into the dark and pulled out 2 heartbeats. I will be forever grateful as my last remnants of innocence echo around in my skull. And then an almost lab took my family apart. A careless morning, banging a tray, the folder fell silent. A place of that exact kind of nature gave me everything yet almost took it all away. So trust me when I say that I have earned the right to be able to say this DNA doesn't lie. It had presented, neatly and in 2 columns, that one of my daughters was not biologically mine. I read it 3 times. Then I looked at my daughters snuggled and tangled together in one bed, because they won't sleep apart. And I learned the other side of the truth, the half no lab will ever put on a page. DNA doesn't lie. Yet it would not do our green fingers either. You aren't carried in it for 9 months. It did not work for 16 hours. But who wakes at 3 a.m. with the same song in its head, night after night for years? It can inform us about the origin of a person. It cannot tell you to whom they belong. It is decided somewhere else entirely, by who shows up and continues to show up, and flat out refuses to look at a child in the eye and see anything other than their own. I have 2 daughters. I will never know which one the page intended. I am not taking that wound with me. That's one door I shut intentionally, locked, threw the key away, and becomes that of freedom like I've never known. And now I want to speak to just one person reading this. Perhaps you are holding onto a letter that you fear to open. Perhaps you have a drawer that hasn't been opened, a question you've had for 8 weeks or 8 years. But haven't asked because you're trying to take the hit in an effort to protect someone you care about. Find out how serious it is before letting them see it. Listen to what it taught me. I married a man who did exactly that. You cannot protect someone by carrying it alone. The carrying alone is the wound. When Daniel finally held that thing with me, it lost its power to destroy us. And you have been that other person in this story. Perhaps you know, white, hot, bone certain sure, exactly what someone did to you. For 90 seconds I was that guy, nearly blowing up my marriage over a grievance that did not exist. So before you accuse, ask. The story you hold true so frequently is the incorrect one. In reality it is sadder, stranger and somehow far more livable than the thing your fear made you to in the dark. If you got this, if you've a drawer of your own, a letter of your own, a question of your own, would you do two small things for me? Do subscribe to these stories in a world where you are so much less alone than the silence wants you to believe. And there are people here in this comments have lived your exact version of this. And then tell me down there below, tell me your age, and whether you'd want to meet the twin, or whether you would slam shut that door forever like I did. There's no wrong answer. All I want to know is, what kind of a love you would choose. I read every single one. Next week I will have a story about a stranger phoning saying he was none of the above and 49 years of DNA evidence proving he'd been at my wedding, grinning in all the photos all those years back. Trust me, you will not want to miss out on this one. I am glad you are still here with me. Take care of yourself, and whatever is in your drawer, you are braver than the silence. You always were.